Thank you for that. Nailed the names. Well done. It was very well done. There's more names coming, so whoever's next week, you've got more. 19,560 minutes. If you're good at maths, you know how long that is. 326 hours. Or perhaps I should say 14 days, and then everyone would know what I'm talking about. That is how long until Christmas. Now, for maybe the younger generation, that's still a long time away. It's still a very, very long time. Maybe for some of us, that is not very long at all. Maybe for some of us, we're panicked about how much we have to do, but I'm sure the kids and the younger ones are probably going, that's just so much time to wait before I get to open presents and have yummy food. Waiting in general is a problem for us. We're not great at waiting. I know I'm not great at waiting. Rach will comment that I might be playing a game on my Xbox or my computer, and if there's a loading screen or a pause, I will often then either start another game on my phone or check Facebook. We're not great at waiting. We want to have something to occupy us at all times. We get distracted quite easily as we wait. I don't think we're going to miss Christmas. I don't think we're going to wait so long and get distracted that we miss Christmas, but we do get distracted. It's just after this scene that Mr. Bean is distracted by this wooden box. If you haven't seen Mr. Bean's Holiday, it's happening in that. He sees this box, he opens it up, he's waiting for a lift, he is hitchhiking, he's waiting for a lift, he gets bored very quickly, enters into this wooden box, and it shuts, and he gets stuck in there. And he misses a car, a bus, and a van, all things that could have taken him where he wanted to go. As we wait for Christmas, we get to see how Matthew leads up to Jesus' birth. Matthew's gospel is pretty easy to see what he's trying to do. He says it straight at the start, but also as you read through, you can see in Matthew's gospel, he really wants a Jewish audience to see who Jesus is. It's very clear it's for a Jewish audience. He has a heap of messianic language that is all about the prophecies of who Jesus is and how he is the Messiah. And importantly, he says Messiah a lot, which is a Jewish word, not Christ, which is the Greek one. He has a heap of Old Testament references. He really wants Jewish people to understand who Jesus actually is. Importantly, he wants the Jewish people to understand that Jesus is the one they have been waiting for. And he does it by presenting Jesus first through his genealogy. He breaks down his genealogy into three broad sections. So we're not going to look at the Adam to Noah bit, but Abram onwards. And really there's the kind of pre-nation. So Abraham, which is what we're looking at today. Abraham to King David, we finished there. Then there's the kind of royal time when there's kings. And then there's the exilic time, the three separate kind of broad sections of Israel's history. There's promises that God makes in each of those sections. There's promises that God makes about who this person is going to be to come. He makes it in the pre-nation, in the royal times, and in exile. There's also events and people that are in those sections that point forward to Jesus. Matthew wants the Jewish audience to see that. He wants people to see, hey, when you think of this person, they have pointed forward to someone. We've been waiting for someone like this. We've been waiting for some event to kind of fulfill this, and it's Jesus. So as we're reading through this, and it's important, and I thought we'd do a genealogy, because often when we get to genealogies, we just cruise right on through. Maybe we skip them completely because there's some tricky names. Maybe we just kind of skim them and just move on. But they are important for us to look at, because it does contain stuff that makes things true. When people are reading this in a Jewish audience or in an ancient audience, they're looking at this and going, these are things we can check. We can look up on this. Actually, this lines up. We know this history. We know this family tree. Now, Matthew does actually skip some people. He's not interested in going through all of it. His maths isn't great either for a tax collector, but he does skip some people. But that's not a concern for us, and it shouldn't be a concern for us because the people who would have cared about this, the people who are into genealogies and understanding who's who, they wouldn't have minded. It wouldn't have been a problem for a Jewish audience. It would have been a problem for a Greco-Roman one. As long as the names line up, as long as it's not made up, if there weren't made up names, if the line can be followed, it's okay. So don't freak out if you're reading Chronicles and you see some extra names in there. Matthew's trying to make a point, and it doesn't matter if he's skipped a few names, just so that we're all on the same page. It's also actually quite common if we're thinking through skipping people, we shouldn't worry, in that if you think back to how the Kings are written, the books of Kings are written, quite often they'll say, this person walked in the footsteps of their father David, and we'll go, well, David's not their father. They're meaning in the line of like them. Sometimes it's in their father Ahaz, and you know that's not a good thing. So we're going to be looking at the pre-nation section, as I said, and it's really from where God chooses Abraham to be his person through to David when he chooses Israel as a nation. There's tribes up to that point, and then it's going to become a nation. It's Jesus' credentials. How does Jesus fulfill the messianic prophecies and promises that God has made from Abram all the way through to King David becoming King David? And again, as we might think, well, it's just a genealogy, it's a chunk of names, but names actually are really helpful. There's a promise made in Genesis 3:15, for example, which is this: and I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. There we go, okay, and we move on. And then we get to Genesis 5, and we're like, oh, names. But actually, there's a list of potential people who could all be heroes. All of these people could deal with sin because we're waiting for this person who will crush the serpent's head. And so we get to this list of names, and we go, is it this person? No, they died. Died the whole way through. Then we get to Noah, and we go, well, maybe. But we realize it's not him, and we move through. So the genealogies are actually really important, because after Noah, we get another genealogy, and then we get to Abraham, and we find out early it's not Abraham. But we know it's going to be through Abraham that God does bless the nations. So that's the thing. When we see a genealogy, there is the one we're waiting for. That's what we should be reading through Genesis. It's actually a list of names that are interrupted by stories. Who are we waiting for? Well, Matthew says, well, it's Jesus, and I'm going to start by looking at Abraham. And he starts with Abraham because when he says Abraham, his Jewish audience should go, oh, we remember the promises. Promises like this in Genesis 12, 2-3. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Matthew is saying, hey, the person you've been waiting for, the one who's going to bless all peoples, he's come. Matthew wants us to see that God has made a promise to Abraham, and that promise is being fulfilled. Remember what God said to Abraham, guys? It's in Jesus. Matthew then moves on to both Isaac and Jacob, and these are the pillars, by the way, of Israelite life. When God introduces himself in the Old Testament, how does he do it? I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These three are just the absolute pinnacles of faith. If you can remember a few weeks back when Jeff was preaching, the woman at the well asked Jesus, are you greater than our ancestor Jacob? You know, no one could be greater than Jacob other than Isaac and Abraham. They are the top. So the top pillars of faith, the ones that all Israel come from. Now we take it for granted, but Matthew is saying, no, this Jesus is true Israelite. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He is in that line. This is the person who Jesus is. And then we move on to Judah being the father of Perez, whose mother was Tamar. And again, perhaps we just go, oh yeah, no worries. But we should pause. We should pause here because Judah is not the firstborn, which you would expect to be the one who is kind of in the line. But what we see in Genesis is growth in Judah. In fact, as I said, as you're reading through Genesis, you're looking for this person who might be the one. And you get to Joseph, and he looks, he's a bit of a brat, but he does look pretty good, doesn't he? He looks pretty good. He's the one who does all the right things in Egypt. He's sent out to rat on his brothers who are working, but after that, he's pretty good in Egypt. So maybe we're thinking, is this guy going to be the one who through all nations are blessed? And then as we move through, we realize actually it's going to be Judah. But Judah isn't all great. Yes, there's the bit where he kind of sacrifices himself or is willing to sacrifice himself for the cup. Now, he doesn't know Benjamin is innocent. So Judah is willing to sacrifice himself for someone who isn't in it, who in his mind might not be innocent. That kind of reminds us of someone, doesn't it? Judah, who his father has said to him, I love Joseph and he's dead, and I love Benjamin, my son. That's a pretty rough thing to hear as a son. I have two sons and one of them is dead. Imagine the other 10 are going, no worries, Dad. But Judah is willing to be a slave to Joseph in Egypt so that Benjamin can go home. Benjamin, who stole the cup in Judah's mind, can go home, and Jacob can die not in grief. That's Judah's crowning moment. That's in Genesis 44. And then there is this blessing, which is given to Judah from Jacob. So Genesis 49:10. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Again, Matthew is making the point, hey, there's Abraham, promises made. It's in Jesus, guys. We get to Judah, there's the ruler's scepter, there's the ruler's staff, the promise that the obedience of the nations is going to be his. A Jewish audience would hear this, they would understand, they're waiting for this. We also have Tamar included in this genealogy, which isn't super odd. Women are occasionally recorded in Jewish genealogies, but it's not common. And so when they are, we should pay attention. And again, for us, we go, why would you include this? If you're trying to demonstrate how Jesus is the legitimate king, is the one who is right, why would you add in kind of a shameful part of what Judah has done? I mean, that is actually how God's done it, so there's truth to it. You can't avoid it, because this is truth. It is through Tamar. Tamar is not an Israelite. She's a Philistine. So if you're thinking about Israel and their enemies, Philistine, that's the worst of the worst, and yet Tamar is a Philistine included in the genealogy of Jesus. Now, the account is messy. It is very yuck, and it's aligned, if you're reading through Genesis, it is just before Joseph and Potiphar's wife. So it kind of demonstrates the difference in their integrity and their sexual integrity between Joseph and Judah. But Judah's sons are evil. They don't do what they should have done and provide for Tamar. Judah doesn't provide as he should have. He should have given his youngest son, and he doesn't. She's mistreated, she's left vulnerable, and she takes matters into her own hands. It's not through Shelah, who is Judah's third-born son through his first wife, that Jesus comes, but through Tamar and Perez. Tamar, who pretended to be a prostitute. She's included in the list of who Jesus comes from. Let's be honest here, if we are trying to make someone look legitimate, if we wanted someone to claim anything, we'd want to avoid any sexual irregularity. We'd want to avoid anything that would be a bit of a controversy. So in this movie, Pascal claims to be a descendant of Charles Edward Stuart. And if you're good with your royals, he's also known as the young pretender. Now, if I'm trying to claim I'm legitimate, probably not going to say I'm the son of the great young pretender. It's not really going to line up. So why would Matthew include this? Because it's true. You wouldn't make this up. If you were making up a genealogy of Jesus, it's going to be the best of the best, isn't it? If we were doing it, we'd go through and go, well, who are the heroes? Let's nail them. So yeah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, fine. We'll say Judah. We won't say how. Then we'll get to Perez. We'll just do the heroes. You would not put this in if you were making it up. Now, we started with the absolute heroes of the faith, the pillars of Israel. And then we get a bunch of people. They're pretty normal, really. There's just a bunch of names. Perez is a little unconventional. So he's a twin. And his brother sticks his hand out first and has a little cord tied around his wrist. And then the hand goes back in and Perez comes out. His name means breaking out. Because that's what they say. This is how you've broken out. You couldn't wait to be the secondborn. You've forced yourself to be the firstborn. But other than that, there's Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, and Nahshon. All just people. We don't really have massive accounts of them. But again, this is a line that people could go back and go, oh, yep, yeah, we can see the son of this person. One of them was them. The son of this person was that. The son of this person is that. This is legitimate. Another mother gets a mention. This time it's Rahab. Rahab, who helps the Israelite spies. Again, another non-Israelite comes into the mix. Rahab from Jericho, Rahab the prostitute. Now, Rahab does help the Israelites, but she helps the Israelites because she sees what God has done and believes that he is going to give them the land. So it's not a bad thing. She actually has faith. She believes. She calls God the Lord, which is a covenant name he'd given to the people of Israel. Rahab has been listening. In Joshua 2:8-11, she says, we know we're all terrified because we've seen what God has done. But in her seeing what God has done, yes, that might have made her scared, but she went, this God is powerful, I'm with him. The rest of Jericho went, we're going to shut up shop, you're not coming in. But think about who Rahab is. She has a house on the wall. Now that is convenient for spies to get out, but it is also not that convenient if you're under attack. The wall is what gets attacked. It is a place of extreme vulnerability. It wouldn't have been a nice big stone wall, like we think medieval castle, huge stone wall that's impenetrable, but that window would have been kind of just probably roof height. Where gets attacked? Where is under threat? Among her own people, she's been put on the wall. Not just inside the wall, on the wall. She's an outcast among her own people, and yet she is named here in the genealogy of Jesus. Rahab demonstrates that God has concern, and Matthew is making this point for a Jewish audience. Don't be surprised by what Jesus is about. Abraham, blessing to all nations. Judah, all nations will be under your rule. We have Tamar, who's not an Israelite already. We have Rahab, who is not an Israelite. Moving through, we get a third woman in our genealogy, Ruth. Ruth the Moabitess. Ruth who left everything to honor and care for Naomi with no promise of protection. Ruth chose to go into Naomi's people's land knowing that that's it for her. She's not going to find another husband. Why would any Israelite want a Moabite? Ruth only got married to an Israelite because that Israelite left Israel to live in Moab. There is no promise for security for Ruth at all. She gathers wheat at the edge of the field like every other vulnerable and outcast woman in Israel. Now, yes, the relationship does begin with Boaz. But first a question, what kind of man was Boaz before he got married? People should know the answer to this. He was ruthless. Not ruthless. There you go. There's your have you been paying attention, bad pun, guys. Maybe by name, but not by nature. He was actually quite a generous guy. He sees Ruth, he looks out for her. He tells his workers actually to leave more than what they would normally. So normally there's do a good job and the people coming behind get the leftovers, right? But he says, no, I want you to actually cut so badly that there's lots left for this lady, lots left for Ruth. He takes on Naomi, he takes on Ruth, and he says so that Ruth's first husband's name could continue. It doesn't, clearly, because he's not the one named here, it's Boaz. But this is what is said by the elders responding to Boaz taking on Naomi and Ruth in Ruth 4:12. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Again, they're saying, we understand that this is a bit of an irregular thing. Now, perhaps when Ruth goes in and uncovers Boaz's feet, there's more going on there than what that phrase means. We don't really know what that phrase means. Even if nothing happens, you'd imagine there'd be a little bit of perception by the people around. Someone sees Ruth go in the middle of the night when Boaz has been drinking and stays there the night, you'd be thinking something's happened, whether it has or not. But that interesting start to a relationship leads to the birth of Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of King David, the absolute pinnacle as far as Jewish thought is concerned. Now we've got to notice that it's King David. We are moving here from this pre-nation, the promises to the nomads, and yes, they're in Israel, but they're still tribes. Now we get to King David. There's going to be a shift in his focus, in Matthew's focus now, from that pre-nation to the national, and this is where it changes. Now, there's promises that are made. We'll get to them next week. There's promises that are made in this. There's kind of people that are events. So King David is a person that people are going, we're waiting for someone again like him. Even the fact that it's David who's king is interesting. If you can remember, if you don't know the story, basically, in a very condensed manner, Samuel goes to Jesse's house to anoint one of his sons to be king. He doesn't know which one, but he goes up there. God says, go there because I'm done with Saul. He is no good. I'm gonna choose a king of my own choosing, not what the people choose, what I choose. So go up to Jesse's house, have all the sons come before you. So Samuel goes and tells Jesse, I need you and all of your sons to come before me to sacrifice. Jesse says, no worries. The oldest comes up, Eliab. He looks pretty good. And Samuel goes, this is the guy. This has to be the guy. He must look amazing, right? I mean, Saul also looked amazing. And God says, that's not him. The second one, the third one, the fourth, the fifth, gets to the last one, still not right. And so Samuel says, is this all of your sons? Because God said, the sons are here. You've told me all your sons are here, and it's none of them. And Jesse goes, oh, no, I got David, but he's out in the sheep. So I didn't really think of him as one of my sons who could be coming before the sacrifice. That's David, right? Bring all your sons. No, David, you look after the sheep for us, please. He didn't even get thought of as an option. But he is God's choice. David, the shepherd boy, the psalmist and musician. Now, he's not perfect. He's definitely not perfect. But he is called a man after God's own heart. David feels guilt because he's in a palace while God's in a tent. Now, yes, Solomon does build the temple. I mean, it's smaller than Solomon's palace that he builds for himself and takes less time, but he does it at least. Whereas David's going, how is this right? How is this right, Nathan, that I'm in a palace and God is in a tent? He dances in front of the ark without any pride in himself. He sits in the presence of the Lord. And again, we see that David is the father of Solomon, not through his first wife, not through any legitimate wife actually, but through Bathsheba, the one he committed adultery with. Matthew actually drives that home, not by saying Bathsheba, but by saying Uriah's wife. That's not a slight against Bathsheba. That is driving home that it's, again, an irregular sexual relationship. It's very unlikely that Bathsheba was an Israelite. Probably a Hittite. Uriah is. We need to remember that David, when he's kind of with his band of merry men, the 30 mighty men, of which Uriah is one, he's not in Israel for a whole heap of that time. He's in different parts of the land, and if Uriah is a Hittite, his wife's probably a Hittite, and it's very unlikely, even if David was around Israel, that any Israelite is going to look at David's random motley crew of all these people from all these different nations, one of them being a Hittite, and says, sure, I'll give you one of my daughters. We wrap up our pre-nation section with this transition, and again, new promises we'll look at next week. But in our few verses today, we've seen pillars of faith. We've seen just normal people. We've seen these absolute heroes. We've also seen some people who've had massive failings. We've also got 4 women. 4 women who are involved in all questionable relationships, not through their doing, whose sons come from situations that would normally be shameful or reasons for us to think God wouldn't work through them. Yet God does. And Matthew wants his Jewish audience to see that, and he wants anyone who's reading this to see that. He wants us to see how God has worked through history, how the person that we've been waiting for to be a blessing to the nations is coming. Perhaps there are those who would question how God could possibly work through Jesus, being that he's Mary's son. Maybe there's that. I mean, people would know that they knew how to count. They would have known that Mary fell pregnant before Joseph and her got married. Sure, they'd think it was Joseph because he stayed with her. But there's still a little bit of question mark there, surely. But I think Matthew makes it clear that if you're going, well, there's question marks because of that, then you're going, well, King David, look at who his grandmother is, Ruth the Moabite. Look at who his great-grandmother is, Rahab. Heroes of faith have come from much worse relationships than Joseph and Mary. And even in the point of that Jesus is in the line of King David, it's not King David the flawless. It's King David the adulterer and murderer. See, Matthew wants, at least in this little section, we'll move on, he wants the Jews that he's writing for to understand that the person they've been waiting for since the time of Abraham, the one who is going to be truly a blessing to all nations, the one who fulfills the promise that the ruler's scepter will not depart from Judah, The one who fulfills all of those things up to when King David comes, and more, but up to when King David comes, is Jesus. We can see how God has already been working to bring other nations into that line. We've got a Philistine, we've got a Canaanite, we have a Hittite, we have a Moabite. All people that Israel was at war with at some point or another. God isn't just for the Jews, but actually all nations. He says that to Abraham, and he's been doing that ever since. The person that the Jews have been waiting for is actually the person that all the nations have been waiting for. It's the person that we were waiting for. The person who fulfills what God has consistently been doing through history. It's not a brand new thing that is completely contrasting to what God has done previously. It's a fulfillment of what God has done previously. God has been redeeming people from the nations already, including them in the people of Israel. God has been using the lowly, the outsider, and importantly, that list of names, they're all sinners. None of them are perfect. No one looks at Abraham's life and go, nailed it. Jacob's definitely not a great hero, is he? Like if no one goes, I want to be exactly like Jacob. Maybe not exactly like Jacob. God has made promises, and Matthew wants us to see, as we're coming forward to Jesus' birth, that those promises come true in Jesus. That's what this genealogy is for. For us to know who it's for, I'm about to tell you. Let me pray quickly before we come into our time of communion. God, I want to thank you for Matthew and his gospel. I want to thank you that he has recorded, Jesus, your lineage, that we can look at this and see who you are and how, God, you have worked through history. I thank you that it is true and we can trust it. I thank you that it includes a whole bunch of people who we probably wouldn't give a second chance to, but people who you've redeemed and people who you have chosen to bring Jesus through into this world that we've been waiting for, as our whole world has been waiting for Jesus. God, as we wait for Christmas and in this lead up, we ask that you'd help us to remember that we are waiting still for Jesus to come again. That we can celebrate what you have done, that there is joy and peace because of it. And we thank you for how you have worked through all of the people in the genealogy, particularly in this first section today. That we can look at the people who are the outsiders, who are the lost, who are the vulnerable, and know that not only have they been redeemed, God, but brought into the people of Israel and people of great importance in our faith and our life. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Just as I'll go down and grab the cup, just so that people are aware where the communion things are. It's a little bit like a plane. It might not be right in front of you. Your closest might be behind you. So there's one just up near the morning tea. There's one just here. And then I think there's one just in that aisle and one here. So they're all over the place. So have a look around to see where your communion is. I'll just grab the bread and the juice. But I thought we could spend a little bit of time looking at, again, doing some historical stuff. So if you have your Bibles with you, we're not going to be reading all of it, but if you have your Bibles with you, if you'd like to turn to Exodus chapter 12, so you can get some context, I'll just grab the bread and the cup.